Hi, guys. Good evening. Welcome to Third Lane. This is Priyanjana, your host for the evening. Third Lane is a bilingual cultural portal where we try to celebrate creativity and storytelling in all forms. And our podcasts are a part of this very endeavor. Today, we have as our guests our very first poets, MD Mohashita, Madhura Banerjee, and Madhumati Chaudhary. Madhura was born and brought up in Kolkata and now works out of Bangalore. She already has two books of poetry to her name, A Tenant of the World and Monsoon Arrives at the Junction Crossing. Incidentally, Monsoon Arrives at the Junction Crossing has recently been featured on a recommendation list by Oxford Bookstore on the occasion of Poetry Month, alongside the works of legends like Amitabh Ghosh and Margaret Atwood. Modhura has also written extensively for other literary portals, including a stint at children's fiction for The Telegraph. We are really glad that she's joining us today and immensely grateful for her contribution to our very first issue. Next, we have with us Madhumati, who primarily and rather inconveniently does not like talking about herself. So, all that we have managed to gather about her is that she is an extremely bad texter, hates punctuation, and loves writing. She also happens to be an editor by profession, working currently for a company named Paper True. Last but not the least, we have Mohashita. Mohashita, apart from being a closet poet and a researcher, is a part of Third Lane's editorial team. She has, in so many words, been one of our greatest assets and, at times of certain bleakness, a lifesaver. At the moment, she's all set to pursue her research in English literature, all the while helping to take Third Lane further along its journey. Thank you, Modhura, Modhumati, and Mahashita for joining us today. Let's get started with a quick round of intro. I'm going to let you guys take it up and speak a little bit about yourselves before we get to the questions.
I can only be grateful that I know people who are starting off ventures like yours. Who, and even I didn't know you before I knew Mohashita. Modhumoti and I go way back. Maths tuitions, remember? And it feels amazing that the love for poetry and the written word of any kind can bring us together. And I have been writing poetry from since I was 7 years old, and there was the I will always be that little girl on the last bench, daydreaming and writing poetry and not following algebra as much as I love algebra, but I'll always be that girl, and I believe that sessions like this celebrates that spirit in us which never dies.
Nice, that's really sweet. Modhumati, why don't you say something? Because, as we've already mentioned, the least amount of information has been provided by you.
Well, so I'm really bad at introducing myself, but I'll try anyway. So basically, believe it or not, I did not like reading, much less writing poetry. For the longest time, I think till I was in class 11, I did not appreciate it at all. But then, funnily enough, I did enjoy some rhyming schemes. Like I like limericks and stuff. So, but in class 11, basically our ISC syllabus had a few very beautiful poems. Notably, I think Shield of Achilles, which ultimately gave way to it became a very important part of my life. It's one of the easiest, I would not say, but still it is the format that I choose most to express myself. And it also allows me to keep sort of a distance, as well as lets me reveal whatever I feel, but I like to sort of twist it into metaphors as much as possible. And so it works out for me because I just want to put something out there, but it needs to be veiled in something entirely different, which I guess is the basic idea, one of the basic ideas that makes poetry. So yeah, I mean, apart from that, the fact that I hate punctuations and I'm also an editor, it is a bit of a struggle there, but we work through that.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that's about, like, I'm really just excited to be a part of like Third Lane, and I when Onok told me about you guys, I was just very excited to sort of see where this goes, especially the fact that you guys are bilingual. And that is something we really, really need, especially like on this scale, because like the promotion of like bilingual content on social media, as much as I have seen, is pretty limited. So this should be,
That is
this is
true.
actually very necessary.
Thank you so much. And yes, that is true. That is sort of what prompted us to go for this format as well. So, Mahashita, on that note.
Yes. So the thing is, it was quite fortuitous that I got to know about Third Lane through Ananok, who recommended my name as a poet. And while talking to Priyanjana, I realized that yes, I have actually edited 2 e-magazines before. Yeah, one from my school, which was probably the first Bangla e-magazine. It was called Emon. It shut down after 2 issues because I'm lazy, and yeah, yeah. But it had happened, and also, I also helped out with Joyrat, which was my father's e-magazine in Bangla. But both of them were in Bangla. This was bilingual, which sort of helped me. Like when you invited me on to be a part of the editorial board, I realized that it would actually help me sort of combine my passion for the two languages, Bangla, which I grew up with, and English, which is basically the language of my intellect. Which is what I studied in college. And so, yes, Third Lane, the idea of Third Lane was sort of perfect for me. It was a godsend since I am in between degrees. I realized that, yes, this gave my life a sense of purpose, and I'm not exaggerating. It did. Yes.
Not to us as well, yeah.
Yeah. So yes, about poetry, I am strictly speaking a no tap poet. I basically stay up late, then I have thoughts and feelings, and I jot them down on my note app on my phone. I never write with my hand or write in fancy notebooks or plan anything. So I'm that, and I basically share my poetry with like the 3-4 friends that I have. Madhumati knows, I send her sometimes, and other people, and that's basically it. My poetry, especially in English, has never been published. So this is basically the first time. There was another time, but that is that was okay, that was negligible, but this is the first time that my poetry is getting published, and that means a great deal to me. So yes, so here we are, Third Lane.
I have read your pieces that are going to be published in the first issue. And I'm really glad that you finally decided to write and publish your work, because I believe that more and more people should be reading it, because I really love it. That said, I think I'm going to start off with my very first question. I wanted to start off with the question that do you primarily identify as a poet? Do you call yourself a poet? But I believe that Mahashita and Madhumati sort of did talk about that. Madhura, you didn't say much on this aspect of your writing, so maybe you would want to take this up.
For the longest time, I mean, that would be since I was in school, since I was writing from my childhood, right? I just somehow started with poetry. I don't know how that happened. It just happened. It's one of those things, and I can just go back to saying how, and the best things in my life have just turned out to be one of those things. Something I cannot really explain, and but I did eventually, along with writing verses, like rhyming verses. I remember my first poem, like flower, rhyming with hour and power and so on. But prose was also, it was supposed to be the most common form of expression. If you want to say something, even if I would write down what I feel, it would essentially come out to be a paragraph or maybe a story. Or so poetry, prose, both have been kind of holding their hands with each other through my life. But I don't know what led me to publish my first 2 books of poetry, or why to this day the rawest of my emotions have come as an expression of verses. But I will say that it is one of the facets about me. It's one of my identities. And I love it. For the longest time, it did feel like a niche kind of identity. Not many writers that I know, people of my age who were writing at that point, wrote poetry. They mostly wrote prose and so on. So it kind of felt like an exclusive space for me. So maybe that also fed the spirit, but that was maybe a very tiny fraction of it. Something looking back that I can realize now. But I did stick with poetry, but when it came to writing on my blog, submitting to when I just started submitting to literary magazines and everything, it was just poems all through. Then, but I did not stop writing prose. I just and like Mohashada was saying that she did not publish them. She used to continue writing them. So the same happened for me and stories, that I got this offer from Telekids Telegraph, the Telekids paper. They said that do you write children's fiction? And I said, yeah, I do write it, but I think what they were asking me was, do you publish children's fiction? But I just told them that I write them, and maybe they'd like to take a look at a few. But then the whole children's short story stint happened, and that just kind of snowballed into other things, and then more things. And I've now written published more short stories than I thought I would. So the identity kind of expanded itself, but it actually primarily happened through poetry, because as it turned out, the editor reached out to me in the first place because she read my poetry.
Oh,
So
nice. Okay.
right now, I'd say that I try to dabble in as many genres as I can. But the one will always be poetry.
Right. Yeah, so actually, you do write creative nonfiction as well, right? Recently, I think there was an article about one of Taylor Swift's albums that I read somewhere. Yeah, so that's nice. What about Mahashita and Madhumati? Do you guys generally like writing other forms as well? Do you experiment with it? Do you try other forms? As I think with Madhumati, I can see her smiling already. Being an editor, what do you primarily edit? Like, is there a particular kind of thing that you
No, not exactly. So basically, since it's like a corporate editing sort of like a situation that I have here, so it's basically I edit everything from like unpublished book manuscripts to screenplays to even like academic papers and like PhD theses and everything. So like I deal with like a range of documents on a daily basis from like different parts of the world. So that sort of gives me some idea of what or how like people are writing elsewhere, and like just general people, like sometimes there will be some academic papers which are written so beautifully, and so so there was this one paper I remember was so poetic, and I literally had to tell the person to like, you have to tone it down a little. It wouldn't have worked out for like whatever he was trying to, like the journal he was trying to get into. But I did suggest that he write like a separate like fiction, non-fiction thing, whatever, like just so that he can like flex his creative muscles there. I'm not exactly the editor of say like someone who works at a publishing house, uh, but I I could I could say that I have sort of a range that a publishing house would not offer. So there is that. But I do not. I have actually limited myself now at this point. I do write like long form poetry. That is something that has happened, but I do not essentially write. Maybe I sometimes dabble in flash fiction, but I do not feel comfortable as I used to before writing, say like fiction, like short stories or stuff like that. But I was a very avid reader of fan fiction, and when I was, I would write a lot of that. So that would obviously be like, that would involve like characters and stories, obviously building on like pre-existing characters, but still like the world of my own. So I guess that can count. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it must be such a treat to see such a wide spectrum of writing in so many different forms, so many different genres of literature. And it would also be very challenging, wouldn't it? Like you're editing an academic piece of writing, and then your next project comes up to be a screenplay, and it's just a massive shift. It sounds fascinating to me.
Yeah, it is. I mean, suddenly, like the way you have to change your mindset is sometimes very fast. It has to. Sometimes it's like within two. Like you were editing something for 2 hours that was just purely academic and technical, and then suddenly you're editing like say a bunch of poems. So it's just the shift happens very like fast sometimes, and especially with like works of fiction and poetry, and you need a different sort of like you need a different mindset, and you need a lot more time than you need for like any other project is what I feel, and is what I have experienced. Sometimes the content is so bad and you still have to provide feedback to it, which is also something that gives you sort of you get to sort of learn how to do criticism of like absolutely bad pieces of work. I guess I mean I guess that is a skill. That is a skill. I have to say. So yeah, I mean you're just used to like as literature students you're used to criticizing like still somewhat like coherent good pieces, or even if they're like illogical they're still like written well. But this is something of a new frontier for me, and I can't say I'm completely averse to it, but I don't always enjoy it because it does get you
So of course, you're not completely
Yeah.
averse to it. Basically, what you've just told us is that the biggest learning that you've had is lowering the bar, and
Oh,
I mean,
yes.
learning to
It
criticize
is
with
sometimes it's so low.
yeah, yeah. Great. Mojit, I think you've been quiet for way too long.
Yeah.
Tell us what other kinds of writing that you like to dabble in.
I wrote a thesis for my MPhil. That's the last bit of writing that I did. And I mostly write academic papers as of now, and I haven't written one in several months, which I have to correct. But yeah, mostly academic stuff, and really fond of starting really ambitious, literary projects. A
Yes.
backwards forward novel and a story about whatever the loneliest human being on planet Earth, stuff like that. Which is also something I write on my phone. Then I never finish it. Then I tell everyone I have had this beautiful idea. I tell them the entire story, and then I basically don't write.
Yes,
Yeah,
I completely identify with that. Now that you're, part of Third Lane, and we'll all make you write more aggressively. I think some of your projects are bound to get finished very soon.
Okay.
Also,
good
that
to
was
know.
very cool topic that you brought up on your thesis for your MPhil. When I first started talking to Mohashita, and she was basically telling me about her research, she launched into a passionate tirade about her, about the things that she's worked on, and I personally found them extremely interesting. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the kind of interesting things that you found? The entire Gothic Kolkata. I think people would be interested to
And
hear
it
that.
is basically fiction in the guise of academic writing. It is basically that. Uh, I was supposed to work on late 19th century Bangla crime fiction and the representations of urban space, basically Calcutta in them. But I went off on a tangent. I wrote about drains and shoshans and graveyards and built environment and all sorts of things. I basically read a lot of theory. I picked and chose, and I created something that is, I don't know how. I brought up a vision of Gothic Calcutta, which was basically a place of that disturbed the imagination of its residents in really subtle ways, from the level of the built environment to the level of crime, all sorts of things. I'll have to go into a lot of theory in order to explain it right now. But yes, that is basically what my thesis is about, and I plan to continue working on cities and urban space, especially South Asian cities, in the future. That's what my PhD is going to be about, I think. So yes.
Yeah, I would love to host you in Bangalore sometime and see how it helps.
When she was talking to me about Kolkata, and just ignore all the academic jargon and this image of Kolkata as a very dystopian, very dark, very I don't know, underworld. I mean, I never saw Kolkata that way, and she made me see it that way. So yeah, fascinating. Moving on, I wanted to ask you guys, since whether published or not, I think most of you write really prolifically. So I wanted to ask how you started off writing. I mean, most of us cannot remember that far back. And like Madhura said, we all have memories of rhyming the easiest stuff and trying to find interesting rhymes for our poems in childhood. But is there any interesting story as to what started you really off? What made you decide that, okay, writing, if not a profession, is definitely going to be a thing, and I'm going to really do it? Some of your pieces clicked, or something that you really wrote and loved, maybe?
With the fact that none of these discussions can ever be complete. Wherever I've spoken, and none of those discussions could ever be complete without mentioning how supportive my parents have been. Even at times when we are all growing up, right? Teenage years had its own set of struggles. 20s, it's been thrilling, but it's been thrilling so far, but it's brought its own share of difficulties and hardships. But there were always two people in the world to remind me where to go back to. uh, what part of the world can restore me, what part of myself it can be that glue to bring all of my pieces back together even when I'm broken. And that has been my parents, and they've been there from the very beginning. So the story goes like this. Cut to 2004. I am 9.5 years old, which again, I don't remember which class. 2005, sorry, 2005. I'm 9.5 years old. I'm in class 4. Again, Telekids comes into the picture. They have these reader submissions, right? They always came at the last page from kids of our age, 7 years to I think 12, at most 15. They published short poems and whatever. So I used to read Telekids religiously for everything, but I used to go to school, go and come from school in a pool car. And suddenly this girl from the pool car, she comes and says, hey, nice poem. Very slyly, she says, he's nice poem. And I was at that point where I wouldn't share anything with anybody. I made my mom and my dad read my poems. When I would write on my desk, my best friend would lean over and read my poems. That's it. Those were the only few people who had access to anything I wrote. And I said, what are you talking about? What have you taken from me? And then she shoves Telekids to my face. And I see that in the last page with reader submissions, they also had the star letter thing, right? That the best submission got editor's pick. And it used to, have these glittery stars around it. And I see my poem there, something I had written maybe a month back or something, rhyming, same old rhyming pattern. Didn't know what I was doing, but it was basically AB. And I was wondering what happened. How did this even happen? Did my writing fly out of my notebook and land on an editor's page? What happened? And then I go back home and I see my dad standing at the door with a stack of papers in his hand. So my first published piece of writing was thanks to my dad, thanks to my parents. And from that moment on, I just kept emailing submissions on my own. And it kind of got the ball rolling. I just the more I grew up, I 11 years old, 12 years old, I just deep dived into whatever online publications I could find. There was Teen Ink, there was so many other different magazines all over, and I just kept sending my writing. And it was like overcoming stage fright, where the stage is literally the page. And it became a comfort zone for me to actually imagine that I could publish my own book, and I did it when I was 21. So I believe it that one moment when this whole world was laid open to me because of two people who believed in me. And taking up writing as a career, full-time career, I thought about it. Full-time career, I don't know. Maybe I did not think about it. There was a time when I considered taking up English literature as my honors subject, but I did study science throughout, and I loved that too. So I eventually stuck with computer science. And but there was this part of me that was constantly alive. It did not depend on what my honors subject is. It did not depend, and it still doesn't depend on what my day job is. And I just do it.
That is amazing, and it's also an interesting story. Yeah, that's great. Madhumati is again smiling, so I'm going to assume that she has a story to share, and just let her take it.
So the thing is, well, growing up, I was surrounded by a lot of pen and paper, mostly because I spent a lot of my childhood at my grandparents' place, and my grandfather was a doctor. So basically, I had access to so many like medical pads and like pens all the time, and like so much paper basically. And so I I was fascinated by my grandfather's like pen collection as well. Like he would open his he would store it all in like his almari, and like he would open it, and I would just sneak up behind him and just stare at like everything that's in there, and the pens would like stand out to me. That is what really moved me to sort of want to like just do something with the pen and paper. That's it. And it was, and I was so young. I mean, I did not even like, I just like learned the alphabet. Maybe I knew cat and dog and stuff. That was it, all the range of my words. And but I really really wanted to write so much, and like I had so much to say. So basically I created my own language, if you will, where it was there, like it looked random, but it wasn't as random to me, where in fact it was like a range of like squiggles and waves, but they had their own meaning to me. But fun fact, it kept changing every time I started reading it. So like every time I went back to the whatever squiggles I had made, they would tell a different story, but it would be a story each time. So I guess that's my first brush with like wanting to write. But of course, my first poem ever was about a butterfly with obviously the same rhyming scheme. That I wrote about a butterfly which is fluttering by and stuff, but in the rhyme. And after that, I distinctly remember in class 2004, I was writing this mystery like story about like two friends on a desolate island, and which I never finished. I remember that. I have a problem with like finishing things as well. Like I start something, but then I'm just like I'll look at it like 5 6 years later. I also was really like obsessed with telekids. Like I would be reading it constantly, but no one ever knew that I was writing. I never told anyone I was writing. My parents were never aware. My father, being a journalist, was also very intensely into writing as well. And so I was always surrounded by people writing everywhere. Different kinds of writing, yes, like, but still writing. And my mother was actually uh, the first person to, I guess she tried to teach me one way was she made me listen to a lot of Bob Dylan and John Baez. And so I guess that is also like gave me an idea of like, oh, so like you know, you put. I've always been interested in deconstructing a piece of writing. So whenever I see a sentence or two sentences, I look at how the elements are coming together to say something that might seem ordinary but is not being said in such an ordinary way. So yeah, like I've always considered music poetry, and I've always considered it literature, something to be read, and which is why I also enjoy rap a lot because there's there's so much poetry there as well. So yeah, I mean, my first brush with writing would be that my made up language, I guess, that would have to tell a story.
I think I can. I think all of us can relate to some extent, because I think every one of us has been through that phase wherein you see a lot of cursive writing around you, and you don't understand it. It just looks like scribble to you, and it's so very different from the big bold letters, the very spaced out letters that are taught to you in school, and you just want to replicate that squiggly mass of writing that you see everywhere. So my dad's handwriting was really messy, and so I would just draw these squiggly lines on paper, and sometimes they actually quite accurately replicated his writing. So that would just make me really believe that, oh, okay, I have grown up and now I can manage cursive writing. But then when they really first introduced cursive writing in school, that was such a pain. I mean, they would just make you join the
yes, I
letters.
hated it.
It was nothing like those really seamless sort of lines on paper that I was trying to replicate all this while. I started hating it. Yeah, and like, can I just go back to the bold, big bad bold letters? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So actually, she was talking about how she's interested in deconstructing the elements of writing, and which sort of is interesting in this context, because when I was reading all three of your poetry together, it strikes me how different all three of your styles are. I just wanted to sort of throw this question out there and see what you think. How do you write, and how do you choose your subjects? And do you think that your style is something that that has been a conscious choice? Has it, of course, it has evolved over time. I mean, we are all talking about rhyming schemes of kids, and we've all started writing as kids. But since you sort of started writing seriously, did it take you time to find your niche? And because it's such vivid styles. I mean, Mahashita's writing, it's so visual. It's got such a lot of beautiful imagery. Madhumati is, I think she's just bang on when she's talking about, because she's good at deconstructing. She has clearly deconstructed her own writing as well, and I think she can agree with me when I say that she relies so heavily on metaphors and just getting two very contradictory things to just juxtapose with each other and create something very I don't know, it's just stunning basically. On the other hand, Madhura's work, it's very vignette based. It draws so very heavily from her experiences and sort of grounds the other two. It was a fascinating blend, I felt, and I am really glad that all three of you are writing together for Third Lane. I think it's going to be a great mix. But on that note, do you have any views on what is it that made you hit upon this style, or was it even a conscious choice, or do you even recognize it? I think we're going to begin with Mahashita, because unless I prod her, she doesn't seem to want to talk. Yeah.
Please. So, for me, as you said, as you pointed out already, my poetry is very visual, and that's probably that has something to do with the fact that I like taking photos. I really do, and I approach most things visually. That's the first thing that strikes me. So, which is something I try to. That is just how I approach poetry. Like it starts out with an image, with a line, and then I write other lines to sort of go around it. And for me, it comes from a really unconscious or rather pre-conscious level, where suddenly when I read it, even say I write something possibly at night when I'm really sleep deprived or something like that, then I go back to it 2-3 months later, 6 months later, and suddenly it makes sense, and I can relate it to something that was probably going on in my life at that point in time, and I hadn't even realized that it was. Evidently there was, which is something I realized much later. So yeah, for me it comes from a really sort of pre-conscious level, and yes, otherwise I don't think I really have a method. I write really sporadically. I'm not a methodical writer, and I know people who write methodically. I'm not one of them. So yeah, this is the most I can talk about how I write my poetry. Yeah.
Okay, let's come to Madhura. I think just because I just said that she draws so very, like, it's my opinion from reading her work that you draw so heavily from your experiences. And I think picking a subject would be a very important thing for your poetry. So how do you actually go about it? How do you decide what to write about? Or is it just some scene or some experience that has struck you and just automatically the words come? How does it work?
Observation. So thank you for reading it so intimately. I would like to say that you felt that that I take it on a very personal note, whatever I write.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is the word that guides me. I never same here. I didn't really think about what drives me, but it just the things are what they are. Is how it just turned out this way. That so I mean, if I can go back to my childhood again. I started writing about flowers and trees and nature. At that point, it was about, look how beautiful that tree is, and do you know what color, what this color green reminds me of? It was all very simple. This is what I'm seeing, and this is what I want to tell you about what I'm seeing. But it stuck with me, I think. And the word personal is the key word here when it comes to. It just struck me when I was thinking about answering your question, that the more I grew in my writing, be it through my teenage or wherever, I just started taking all of my surroundings very personally. And I think that has been my style of writing. So both my two books of poetry so far have been based on travel. It's about all of the places that I've been lucky enough to see. It's been about the Himalayas. It's been about the ocean. It's been about cities. And as much as I write about, oh, look how beautiful that city is, it is about how much that city lives in me, and what am I, how does the city reflect in me, and at the same time, how does nature reflect in me, and I try to uphold a sense of beauty and positivity, softness and calmness through whatever I write, positivity mainly. I do write more prose these days. I don't know how that happened. Whatever I've written about Bangalore has mostly been prose. But even if I'm writing about heartbreak, or even if I'm writing about disappointment, um, I mean, oh, okay. So, okay, let me arrange my thoughts. What I'm trying to say is, as much as my surroundings have influenced my poetry, that I start writing about the Himalayas, and it eventually comes down to a very human experience about watching a woman sell woolen shawls next to an unassuming road in Mussoorie. As much as it is in that direction, I've found recently that it goes in the other direction also. I start writing about, I am going through a tough phase in my life, and it blows out or brims over and starts to embrace the city of Bangalore. And I'm sitting here and I'm feeling alone, and I try to describe the feeling of loneliness, but I cannot write it without describing how the neighborhood of Indiranagar is lonely at this hour, and the lampposts are glimmering in their own solitary beauty in the. So yeah, that has been my entire writing style. It's a relationship between me and the world beyond, and holding the just trying to catch the world as it passes me by, and at the same time having the world embrace me, and work, and it having both work both ways.
I think in that very eloquent explanation, we just saw, the birth of a metaphor happening, because I think that's how metaphors work, and very well put. Madhumati, why don't you say something? Given your love for deconstruction of writing, this would be a question for you.
Nowadays, I mostly write out of spite. I'm just like, yeah, I'm just angry. I wouldn't say that it's angst. It is spite, and it is because like I see a lot of there's a lot of writing out there, and I don't care about the fact that it's being spread. It's I mean like any kind of writing and every kind of writing should be out there and should be accessible. That's a given. But sometimes it's the most cliche metaphors, and sometimes it's the most cliche way of putting things out there that like really it sometimes really makes me so angry that I want to rewrite the thing in my way. So a lot of the times my topic of writing comes from the fact that I'm just very angry about something that I want to write about or that has been written, but it's done in such a bad to me personally way that I want to rectify it. So it's not a very sustainable method of inspiration, if you will, because it 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 ultimately is coming from a very negative place, and so it reflects in your writing in any way. And I've never been like a person who writes happy thoughts and stuff. I've mostly been a very all my writing eventually go to some dark direction or the other, and there have been times when I've tried to avoid that. I have, but then even when I was writing like a funny poem, like I have a poem about gluttony, but the thing is, it's about gluttony. So
Yeah.
it is written in a very like ridiculous way, and I quite enjoy the poem. But the thing is, in the end, it's about something quite negative. On the note that Modhura said, like, you know, how her writing, there is like some, like she wants to hold on to a positive a feeling, and which is something I really, really struggle with, and something I really appreciate in people who can hold on to. Because even when I'm seeing the beauty in things, I'm also wondering about its withering away at in the same instant. And the fact is, even if whenever I'm writing anything, I have to make sure that it hasn't been written before, or it has not been written in that particular way before. It has to be a set of combination of things that does not come to mind instantly. It has to be something like offbeat every time, and it is such a pressure for that I put on myself, which is not sustainable at all, which is what has diminished my writing. Like I was very prolific uh, for like 2 years, 3 years in college. During my last year of BA and my first 2 years of MA, I was writing a lot, and then I just stopped because it's just this constant pressure that I put on myself, which is a result of the fact that I want to deconstruct everything. Because I cannot write that that thing is red. I need to write like that is like rust sitting in the sun or something. It just, and it can be like the color of an apple that I'm writing about. While it is something that when it comes to me naturally, I immensely enjoy it. In fact, I am honestly like it is something I really love writing, like deconstructing things that way. But it is so much pressure that it also immediately drains me to an extent where I cannot write for the next, I don't know, 3 4 months at least, if not 7. So yeah, it's my writing is very exhausting. It's very there's a lot of extremes, and it's just very exhausting for me.
The editor in you that just got frustrated with all the nice words you had to say to all the bad writers out there, and just translate to this. But you know, the interesting thing is that this effectively means that out of all of us, you probably live in your work the most, which I see can be extremely exhausting.
Yeah, I do get like addicted to, like I do have an addictive personality. I just get addicted to whatever I'm doing like very passionately, and sometimes I don't even realize it. And like the fact that you just said that I live in my work a lot, it's like I just realized it as you said it, and now it's like hitting me, and I'm just thinking about it right now. So
Oh wow,
yeah.
okay. I did not want to
No,
take
no,
on
it's
that
fine, it's fine.
responsibility, but one of the questions that I've been meaning to ask, that how poets use poetry also as a medium to get their voices heard, and that has always seemed quite interesting to me, because in popular culture and in our mind somehow, maybe that's an effect of old school colonial poetry or something, but it's always associated with the idea of just opulence and luxury and just beauty. And poetry has been now associated with so many different movements. So yeah, I mean, it seems interesting that it's a medium that is most commonly associated with the idea of luxury and beauty, and yet it is the one that is also most used as a form of protest, as a form of raising your voice, from the resistance poetry to even something like spoken word. What do you think about this, and how do you think that poetry lends itself to the form of protest, or as a medium of protest? Mahashita, you might want to start off with this one.
The first thing I was reminded of when you brought this up was this course that I did. Madhumati was also a part of it, American poetry in Jadavpur. I remembered the sheer sort of the proportion of poems and poets who were sort of dedicated to this idea of protest. Of course, American poetry, so it's about Black poetry.
Yeah.
It's about protesting the military-industrial complex in the 1950s, Joseph McCarthy's America. Even say something
Vietnam.
that yes, Vietnam. There's even something like confessional poetry. Say something by Sylvia Plath or Anne Sexton. Those can be related to contemporary events such as say Joseph, the court
So
case. It's a very narrow lens, and I don't know to look at it, but that sort of proves the point, right? A course on it's a joke. It's a territorial thing. You're talking about poetry in general from a particular say a particular nation. Even there, like almost a lot of it is related to the history of that particular nation, the sort of upheavals that it went through. So I think the whole idea of associating poetry to primarily to luxury and say something of an excess or something that's something that's superfluous that can be done away with is fundamentally flawed. I mean, it's an idea like anyone who reads poetry will see that opposite. And it's also about the form of poetry. Like if you think about classical sort of forms, maybe yes, they are more restricted to a certain population who have access to that sort of knowledge, who have that sort of capital. But if you, as Madhumati has said earlier, if you sort of try to erase the boundaries between forms, if you include music into poetry, if you include rap music, you'll see that it accesses a huge section of society. For that reason, it is the opposite of superfluous. It's sort of it's fundamental to our political existence, our ethical existence. And as we have already seen while studying literature, everything we do, right, the personal, everything that is being written, everything that is being read, in fact, everything is a political act. So I wouldn't make that division as such between luxury and protest and stuff like that. I'd say everything is enmeshed. Even poetry that sort of say something that came out of the art for art's sake movement, even that had political implications in some way. So that's my take on this.
So, so basically, you're saying that all poetry is at some level political, and that's Madurai. Would you want to add to that?
I'm glad you segued to me, because I just want to hold on to the last statement that Mohashita made, that all of poetry is an act of is a political act, or it has a statement, right? I would like to talk about this anthology that came out recently. It's called Still We Sing. I contributed to it. It is a collection of poems about violence on women, and it has been written by different people. Like we have Tishani Doshi contributing to it, Shumana Roy, as well as Deepti Nawal, the actor. Just the fact that you could have a collection like this is proof that women can speak now. And how is that anything but a commentary on the progress from the times when women weren't allowed to express their thoughts, or if they had needed to, they had to use pen names, male pen names. And now we don't just have women writing. We have them writing about the oppression that they went through, that our mothers and grandmothers went through. So I think to have such collections exist, to have any poem exist, can be traced back to a time when it wasn't allowed, and now we can. So how is that any less of a statement? The existence of any poem is a statement. And I believe that we owe it to our predecessors. Like my grandmother, she did complete her masters, but didn't have the opportunity to do anything with it. She had that degree, but then she was still cooking and cleaning and not really utilizing that. When on poking her, the worst part is she didn't think that it deserved to be explored. So a lot of poking and probing her made her show me her notes from university days. And the aesthetic lover in all of us would be blown away by the whole yellowed pages, impeccable handwriting, and coming from all of these things preserved and treasured, and no one to talk about it, no one to let alone discuss the course materials that she studied, or even have her open her mouth about it. So I wrote extensively about that. I wrote essays, but I also wrote poems about my grandmother and her voice, and so on. So whatever we do and whatever theme that we choose as our when we are writing poetry, it I feel that it inevitably reflects on where we are right now, which is tied to the past. Even if I'm writing about some of my other relatives from the past two generations who had to cross the border, and after coming from Bangladesh to India, they still had nothing. They had no roots. And Agha Shahid Ali's writing actually inspired me to explore this side of my family who had to migrate from Bangladesh, and I wrote extensively. As as ignored as this side of our partition story is to the popular media, but yes, that's how I feel.
Talking about displacement, talking about different collective feelings, I would say, brings me to something that Madhumati also talked about before: rap and maybe even spoken word. So I've been told that you happen to be some sort of an expert on the history of the rap movement and its socio-political importance as well. So in this context, I mean, the idea of poetry as a movement, where do you see its place in India?
I was recently listening to like obviously like let's think about the fact that Gully Boy had blown up when it came out, right? And it was not even the best of rap that was coming out of India at that point. But it's still it still was a statement in a way because it made rap, at least Indian rap, mainstream that was beyond the likes of say just Honey Singh. And he is not even he's not a rapper. I remember very clearly when I first encountered this idea of like truth being spoken, that needed to that need not be beautiful in the conventional sense or need not be beautiful at all, but it should be out there, and it can be out there in the form of poetry, which is considered conventionally uh, talking about like aesthetic things. So basically, when we were reading Keats's Ode to a Grecian Urn, there is that line where I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but beauty, truth, truth, beauty. That is that essential line. That is something that I keep thinking about all the time, and which is something that has made me open to a lot of content like that. Even if something is not well written, if the idea of it is there and the idea is something that is crucial, then I feel like it needs to be out there no matter what. Spoken word and rap in general or are much more accessible forms of literature available, and it does not put it does not bring in like a hierarchy, so the thing is there are people who feel like they haven't read enough to talk about something, but with music or with spoken word you can just sit there and listen to someone. Even when you don't feel like reading it, you're listening to something, and that is still adding to you. So in that way it is, I guess, more essential at this point, and which is also what makes political rallies somewhat of like poetic in a way as well, because the slogans, when you're coming up with slogans, they're poems in a way. Like they're snappy poems that you memorize and that you keep chanting until you believe it, and until you make people believe. You're giving them like limericks, you're giving them funny I don't like political leader like or mathay ukul hok, right? I mean like it's funny, it's getting to you, it's getting to the people, and that's the point of any art, is that it needs to get to the people and make a difference in some way or the other. Even if the person has a renewed sense or idea of beauty, that is still something that art has done and that needs to be done. So, I mean, that is where any art should be. And it does not matter if it's beautiful or not. It just needs to do something. It just needs to evoke something. And yeah, that is what I feel. I think that's a very general, I guess, opinion. I don't know, but it's something that the Beats have talked about like a punch in the gut and like a something in the eyes, pointing you in the eye. It's some that is what or most rap does, most of the rap that I listen to does. And and basically rap started out as a way to like counter the white man's like buying up of like these white producers were literally paying black rappers money so that they would rap about like the same things, like about jewelry and girls, and in very offensive ways, but it was not what the community was about. And that is like, and it slowly grew to a fact where like there were black rappers who were empowering other rappers, and now it is a completely different community where Kendrick has won a Pulitzer Prize for his album. I mean, they've come a long way. So that is what I'm saying. Like, it can start as being not beautiful, can start as being very crass, but you always have to dig deeper because there's more to it than meets the eye.
Absolutely, and I'm so glad I asked this because that was a very rich round of opinions and well put also, Monumonti. I mean, we probably didn't notice it, but we've been talking for quite some time. So we'll I think sort of close it here, but with one last question where I think I'm going to take it a little bit personal again. All three of you writing poetry, all three of you writing English, and all three of you are Bengali. It's not like we've been restricted to just one particular kind of reading in one particular kind of language all through our lives. I mean, being part of Bengali households, we've all had exposure to Bengali reading as well alongside English reading. I mean, it's probably the case that we were exposed to English reading much later. So what is it that prompted this decision to write in English and then take it up seriously, pursue it seriously in English? It's let's start with Mahashweta, given that I know that she chooses to write in both, but for poetry, I believe prefers English over Bengali. So let's start with you.
So I wrote a single poem in Bangla when I was in first year, I think, which is 2013. And my entire family laughed at it so much. I haven't written anything in Bangla ever since. So the thing is, I primarily, to be very honest, I used to at least primarily write in Bangla growing up. So my father had a little magazine in Bangla. So I was kind of prodded to write in Bangla a lot. And also another thing is I never learned Bangla in school. So it was all at home. So I was made to type in Bangla. I was made to write in Bangla. I was made to read Pother Pachali and books like that in Bangla. I was literally made to do that because my second language at school was Hindi, and my parents wanted to make sure that I knew Bangla. So despite never having sort of a formal education in Bangla until class 11 and 12, I was immersed in Bangla at home. I was reading Vibhuti Bhushan, I was reading Rabindranath, I was reading Sharat Chandra, and that went on for like till I was in class 9 or something, which is when I started reading English like seriously. So for me, the decision to basically pick English as, say, an adult sort of cerebral language was very, very personal. I was rebelling against my parents for shoving Bangla down my throat. Yeah, so basically that's why I started reading voraciously in class 9 and 10. I started with, it's a really embarrassing sort of confession, but I started with Twilight, but that led me to Emily Bronte, that led me to a year of reading Dickens compulsively. I basically, by the time I had finished class 10, I read Hardy Dickens, the Brontes, all of Jane Austen. Like, I read like a maniac. And 11th and 12th, I just went on that track, and I knew by the time I had by the time I was in class 11 and 12, I sort of knew that I wanted to study in English. So the sad thing that happened is that the level of my Bangla, especially in sort of a creative with regard to, say, creative work, that has stuck to class 9 or 8. That hasn't grown since then. So if you ask me to write something really serious in Bangla, I will probably not be able to do that, despite being sort of my actual serious, proper academic work, even creative work as an adult, has primarily been English. And as I said, for me, it was a deeply, deeply personal decision. I was rebelling against my parents. Yeah, but the irony is basically that by the time I was doing my MPhil, the subject I picked was Bangla, which is Bengali detective fiction, stuff like Pionath Mukhopadhyay, which is like 19th century Bangla, not in like proper 20th century thing. I just went way back and I worked on Bangla and everything. So yeah, for me it has been a back and forth. It was
Yes, you
it's
had
just
to factor in the dichotomy somehow. So I mean, you were going through with English, so of course you had to factor in Bangla somehow. Interesting.
it came back in spite of my best efforts. So yeah, that's basically it.
What about you, Madhura?
No one to blame here,
Mm.
but I had more exposure to English books growing up than Bangla, and I'm not talking about in my family. In my family, it was, I mean, our bookshelves are stacked with Bengali literature, but at school, where I spent most of the greater fraction of my days, we read more stories in English than we did in Bangla. And since my fascination for writing started at a very young age, I'm just guessing. I'm just trying to connect the dots here. That maybe because we usually replicate what we hear or what we know most, writing in English just seemed to be the natural way to go, because all of my teachers spoke in English. Everything that all the daydreaming that I did was a product of Enid Blyton, was a product of Louisa May Alcott, L.M. Montgomery.
Yeah.
I mean, I would be looking out of my classroom window and imagining an English countryside. I mean, why wasn't I imagining the Himalayas? But it just, we had something about our approach to reading, which I think if we investigate more, it will be a very interesting take on the psyche of students from our age. Again, a little similar to what Mohashita was saying, that English, English became my niche. It became my identity away from my family. It was like something that as I mean we could dare to do things in English. In the I wish I had read during my school years. My Bengali reading improved after I was 18, I think. And it just seemed like Bengal English literature was keen on taking more chances. It was more brave. It would talk about love and relationships, and it would talk about, I don't know, even the fantasy novels that I read. It was just so imaginative, and it would feel like the way we feel that our parents are backdated, that they don't really just get the whole trend right now. The whole sentiment seemed to be something related to that, which was completely wrong, which was a shame. Because right now, as an adult, when I'm reading Nomonita Debshin's poetry, I feel like she's speaking to my soul. And this is what I needed when I was 18, 19, just to feel less alone in my solitude. But better late than never. But I think that is where my choice of writing English comes from. It felt like it gave me a sense of singularity, and I've always treasured any idea of solitude that I could, something that is mine and mine only, something that keeps me apart from the general crowd. And everyone around me spoke in Bengali, so I needed to think in English. And somehow, and we all went through that misunderstood phase, right? Nobody gets me, and I felt like all of those sentiments found a better voice in English than I did in Bangla. Because if I would say those things in Bangla, it would be like apologizing to my parents, like, Amar erakom lagche, that way. It felt like an apology, which now I know is completely wrong. And I wish I had been wish I had been braver, wish I had been more adventurous, allowed my adventurous spirit to tap onto the Bengali language. But I'm doing it now, so
Yeah,
let's see.
I think that's an interesting take because, yes, angst has been presented to us in Americanized language mostly. So, yes, I think whenever we feel angsty, we feel American angsty. We do not know how to feel angsty in Bengali, I believe. So that is a problem. Bangla needs more angsty work, maybe. And I think I do believe the new age generation of Bengali writers, they are getting to it more vehemently. And of course, as Mudra mentioned, there are already unexplored authors of Bengali that we're just not exposed to enough, and that there is a problem in the balance of reading that we are exposed to as kids, especially kids of privilege, as we kind of are. So yeah. Madhumati, would you want to take that up?
So yeah, I mean, like I agree with Modhura. Like our medium of instruction was English, and like there was like Bangla was like one subject that's there that you read like in one period every day, and that's it. But throughout like your school life is there's like 10, 12 other subjects that you're studying in completely in English. So I mean that's obviously like, and the thing is, I used to study in a school where the medium of instruction was Bengali, but the thing is I did not uh, enjoy the teachers, and this is like me in what prime, like pre-primary. Okay, so I did not enjoy the classes or the teachers, so I would just wander outside the classroom, and there would be like constant complaints about that. But the thing is, I did not enjoy it because I realized that I liked English more, and since they were teaching me in Bengali, I just didn't want to learn. I just walked out. So the thing is, there's also like some part of it is also to be blamed on, I guess, TV, because Doordarshan was there, but there were a few what do shows on Doordarshan that were in English, and there is also like films that you are watching. You're growing up with Disney movies. You're growing up with Sound of Music and whatnot, and so basically, like I came to back to Bengali a lot later, and it was due to a lot of other reasons, mostly my very close friend. But I was also studying, my parents basically focused on English because they weren't very adept at, or as adept as they would have liked to be in the language, and they literally did not want me to fall short, because at that, like, English, as we know, fortunately or unfortunately, is a very important language to know in terms of like professional life or even your education. So they were preparing me for my future. And in that way, they sort of put more pressure on me learning English properly than Bengali. And so I'm not blaming them, but I'm saying it has been a disproportionate pressure. And in that, I did not exactly feel like I wasn't having fun with the language. I wasn't learning. I didn't want to learn. It felt like a chore. On the other hand, English I was having fun with. The fact also lies in that whatever I touch, I need to perfect it at that point right then, which happened with English did not happen with Bangla, because Bangla spellings are hard. It's difficult, and my Bengali was atrocious, and I just couldn't master it right then. But with English, I could. So that also was like something that was going on within me. That was like an internal thing, which I realized much later. But the thing is about like Bengali angst, there's so much Bengali angst out there. I mean, if like half our ICSC and ISC syllabuses were like Bengali angst, and and then the thing is, and then there's all the music. There's all the Bengali music that's there. There's so much popular music that's so angsty. I mean, what is Otu Paura doing? But the and then the thing is, it was also around like in class 11 when one of my closest friends, like Modhu Bonti, yeah, so she has always grown up with like Bengali literature and English literature in the same measure, but for her it was more balanced. And her father was also like part of like the hungry generation of poets and everything. So she introduced me to a completely different world. It's like there was like Shokti Chattopadhyay and the Shankar Ghosh, all of that. She was bringing me into that. She was giving me poetry. She was giving me a new, like, a lease of life, maybe. And it completely changed my appreciation for the language. But the fact is the damage, so to speak, had been done, and I was already thinking in English 24/7. So I couldn't, and there is, I think, I don't know where I heard this from, but I think most of us have heard this. Is like the language that you think in is the language that you are most comfortable in, and it may not always be your mother tongue.
Yeah.
That so like so that's what I mean. I was just really comfortable thinking in English, which is why my writing was in English, and I could never hope to replicate that depth of feeling with Bengali,
Mhm.
which is what stopped me from writing in it, but never reading it. And I got back into it much later. But yeah, I mean, I'm totally there with Modhura, because I wish I had like read so much of this back then. But to some extent, I'm glad about whatever I had read because of Modhubanti. So yeah.
Yeah, interesting and very relatable, because I think to some extent most of our generation have had this. And if we are speaking about, like Madhumati said, that the damage has been done, uh, whether it's really a damage or not, it's a fodder for another discussion. But definitely the effect has taken root, I believe, in the entirety of our generation. I don't know if we all think in English. Of course, we don't. But English is definitely sort of undeniably a part of how we think. I mean, even when we are thinking in Bengali, it can no longer be in complete, unadulterated Bengali, because Bangla hasn't evolved that way, which again would lead to a separate sort of majorly political discussion on why and how. But yeah, so that is my take on it. But yeah, it was really interesting to know your views, and great conversation, guys. I mean, I got to know so much, and this was a lot of fun. I hope you guys enjoyed it as well. Thank you all, and please keep following Third Lane. Keep visiting our site for more content, and we'll keep trying to bring you interesting discussions like this. See you again soon. Bye, everybody.